there. Ever wonder what it takes to forge a blade of the underworld? Well, wonder no more, because this episode I'll show you how to make the Stygian Blade from the game Hades. Now let's get to it.
What I'm going to do is make my pattern out of newspaper. I'm going to do this by looking at the reference picture and then using a flat edge kind of ruler kind of thing to make sure I get some straight lines. And then I just cut it out with an X-Acto knife. And we're going to draw on the details, again, just by looking at the reference picture and making it as accurate as I want it to be and adding on the little details that I want to put onto foam. Then I'm going to cut it out of foam. For the base of the blade, I'm using a 5mm foam. So I'm going to cut out 2 of these shapes, and then I'm going to use a rotary tool to carve out a spot in the middle where I'm going to put a curtain rod so it's not all floppy. Then I'm going to heat seal the foam using a heat gun. This just kind of closes up the foam, so the glue that I'm using here won't get all absorbed into it. The glue that I'm using is contact cement. This stuff is really toxic, so whenever working with it, you have to be in a well-ventilated area, and you have to wear a respirator. And I'm just gonna put the 2 pieces together and press them down. And then I'm gonna use my rotary tool again to kind of sharpen the edges, make them look more like a blade. I also like to wear a mask when I do that because, as you can see, the stuff kind of gets everywhere and you definitely don't want to get that in your lungs. Now for the skull, I'm going to be making the pattern the same way I made the other one. I'm going to look at a reference picture and then just kind of draw on the design. Something for the skull though is, since it's going to be kind of curved, I have to cut these little pizza slice kind of things. And when I glue those parts together, you'll see that it kind of helps form that dome shape for the skull. Using the same kind of contact cement for this stuff, so it's really strong and the seams are really flush and you won't be able to see them. And here you can see me putting those little pieces sliced slits together, and I'm going to be using heat to kind of shape the foam the way I want it a little bit. You can see that those little slits definitely helped add some shape. Then I'm going to take my rotary tool again and just make sure the edges are all smooth. Now I'm taking an X-Acto knife and I'm kind of carving in the design of the face that is on the skull. I'm going to do this, and I'm not going to cut all the way through the foam. I just kind of want to get a pattern of where I'm going to carve out what this face is going to look like. Now I'm taking my rotary tool and I'm kind of sanding down where I traced out my pattern with my X-Acto knife and kind of adding in those dents and extra effects. Now for the leaves that are on the sides of the skull and on the handle, I'm just going to look at my reference picture and cut out a bunch of leafy shapes. I didn't really make newspaper patterns for these, I just kind of looked at the picture and drew the shape directly onto the foam and cut the foam pieces out. Now I'm going to take my rotary tool again and I'm just going to smoothen down all the edges for the leaves, so when I glue them onto the sword they will look so nice and pretty. For the handle, this was kind of tricky. I took a really thick piece of EVA foam and just cut the long strip and then just used hot glue and went back and forth between hot glue and my heat gun and curled it around the curtain rod part, so I had this handle. Now for the little diamond on the edge, I just cut out 2 little triangles, and then I did this special kind of slit down the center of it. You don't cut all the way through the foam, you just make 2 cuts, and you hold the knife to the side, so you end up having this kind of triangular dip in the foam, and then you do this so when you fold it, you'll see this really defined diamond looking kind of shape. Then I just hot glued them together and sanded down the edges. For the bottom piece, I just traced directly from the triangular shape and then put a hole in the middle of it and then glued it to the bottom. To add some extra details to the skull, I used foam clay. This was probably the most difficult part, but it wasn't overwhelmingly difficult. It was just a long process of doing the clay, looking at the picture, and moving it around. So I'm mixing foam clay with water so it kind of blends into the foam of the skull really, really well and kind of seamlessly looks like it's part of it, and I didn't just add foam clay on top of it. Now for the details on the blade, I'm using a wood burner, and I'm using this ruler so I get some really straight lines. And again, I just kind of looked at the reference picture and saw the little arrow designs, laid out my tool, and then went along with the wood burner. I also went around the edges of the blade because the blade does have this little divot kind of thing that goes around it. Next, I used Plastidip to seal and prime the blade so I could start painting. Then I painted the whole thing white so it would be easier to put the colors on top. I used a mix of acrylic paint and then this other stuff is called FX paint. You can kind of see the label here. It's specifically for EVA foam and like cosplay kind of projects, and as far as I know, this is the first kind of paint that exists for these kinds of projects. This was my first time using it. I'm really happy with how it turned out. The red that you saw in that last part I felt was a little too bright, and then looking at the pictures, it does look like the blade has almost like different kinds of red that kind of swirl and mix in with each other. So I took a darker red and went over it with the really, really bright red. So in this part of this video, it does look a little bit darker. That's because I went over it again with a darker, more kind of maroon color and mixed it in with the really bright red to kind of make it look more swirly and magical. For the runes that are on the blade, just using really bright green acrylic paint, looking at the reference picture, and putting them on there. Now I'm taking a paper towel and putting some black paint on it, and then I'm just kind of dabbing it around the leaves. And this kind of helps add another kind of magical looking weathered texture kind of look. And here's the Stygian Blade all finished.
I hope you found this tutorial helpful. If you've got questions, feel free to tweet me at ZTV Goofing Off with the hashtag CreateYourCharacter. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.